Two for Free podcast on this wonderful Juneteenth. I'm Garrett.
And I'm Phil.
Awesome, and welcome guys to our live stream. We're raising money for the NAACP up in here, and we wanted to show our appreciation for the African American community. Hey, Phil, can you explain to our audience a little bit about Juneteenth and why we celebrate it?
So Juneteenth is the celebration of when Union soldiers landed in Texas to let the last remaining slaves know that the Civil War had ended and that they were set free by the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th and 14th Amendments.
Yeah. So our Emancipation Proclamation was written in 1863, 2 years before the war actually ended, which is crazy. Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. So we can start off giving a little bit of breakdown, and then we can have a little bit of a discussion about where we can go forward with diversity, and it's still a little tricky.
Yeah. So basically what we were thinking today is that in order to celebrate Juneteenth, we wanted to honor the advancements of not just African Americans, but all people of color and diversity in general in the musical theater sphere, going all the way back to the Civil War era and bringing the discussion forward to today.
Yeah. So I guess we can get started from the very beginning. Phil, if you don't mind, we'll just kick it off, throwing it back before the Civil War. I don't know if anyone's familiar with minstrel shows. If I can explain a little bit about it. It's a very problematic art form. It started off pre-Civil War with white European American actors who portrayed African American people or people of color. And they would often use burnt cork to darken their skin, and they would use white makeup to exaggerate their lips, or they would use paint basically to exaggerate the shape of their lips. And obviously they perpetuated a lot of stereotypes, a lot of the stereotypes that we have till today, with watermelon and then like fried chicken. That's where kind of it all started off. So it's very problematic in it's spurred off this racism, and a lot of people forget that theater was kind of the main form of entertainment back in the day, and this is how people perceived the African American community.
So there was a lot of negative stereotypes being enforced all the way back then with these minstrel shows, right?
Absolutely.
You'd have these actors who are typically Caucasian Europeans or Americans portraying themselves in blackfaces, putting on voices and dancing in such a way that would be stereotypical and very problematic for the African American community. It's the same thing that you'll see in cartoons from newspapers at the time.
Oh, yeah.
You'll have when the African Americans are portrayed, they're portrayed in kind of this blackface style with exaggerated lips, big noses, and it was systemic, this kind of racism that was there, and that is something that hopefully will be able to change.
But yeah, I mean, and it permeated throughout entertainment, not just on stage, but I mean, Disney movies have evidence of this sort of racism. The Song of the South is kind of based off of the happy-go-lucky person of color who is a magical person that will take you on an adventure, and then that is not who they were. They weren't criminal. They were also portrayed as a conniving con men who would often either trick people of their own skin color. And yeah, so they were often portrayed as less than, and this perpetuated this message of racism. After the Civil War was done, there were a few black actors who wanted to pursue it as a career, and there were a couple that kind of stand out: Burt Williams and George Walker. They're really good. I was doing some research on them. They started off. They did the show in San Francisco. It's not so much a show as it was a zoo. So they had these different villages. That there was one called Dahomey Village. Dahomey is a kingdom in Africa, and they would be in the middle of this park, and they would just have a bunch of houses. They also had a Hawaiian village. They had a Japanese village and what they called an Oriental village. I don't say that. They meant like Egyptian or like Middle Eastern more than.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
So
So
from what was then the Orient.
exactly
Yeah.
the where the Orient actually was.
Yeah.
So obviously, yeah, they met together. They actually first met in San Francisco, and they would later become a duo, and they called themselves the Two Real Coons. But they flipped what they would normally portray in the minstrel shows to play that juxtaposition, and that incongruity really worked with them. And they also worked to break outside of that minstrel format. It also was a dying format too because vaudeville was coming up. There's a lot of great. There's a lot of evidences as you can see the evolution of theater itself, like burlesque shows. Then it was minstrel shows, and then it was vaudeville, and then Broadway musicals ended up becoming the most popular art form. And still to this day, it's one of the most popular um, theater forms, I would say. As a lot of theaters, community theaters will let you know that that's one of their kind of bread and butter for the years, the musicals. That's where they make most of the money. So it's important to have these people of color. It's important to have their voices heard, not just on stage, singing, but also behind the scenes. Burt Williams and George Walker would work with a composer by the name of Will Marion Cook, who is also an African American composer. He's a librettist, violinist, and a choral director. He he worked with them on In Dahomey, and he also wrote the first one-act musical comedy. It was called Clorinda, or the Origin of the Cakewalk.
The cakewalk. Now, what is the cakewalk, Garrett? I've heard that term before, and from my musical experience, I've played pieces that are like cakewalks. So,
Yeah.
knowing kind of what it is, what is it now? What does the cakewalk mean now?
Yeah, so back in the day, the cakewalk was, it started off on plantations and there were competitions. It was called the prize walk. They would do this dance. It actually started off as a way to make fun of the white people in society, make fun of the upper class, essentially. And they would do a lot of exaggerated dance movements, a lot of like exaggerated bowing, and a lot of like stylized walking. And they would hold these competitions on the plantations, and the plantation owner would be the one who would choose the winner. And the person who won, it would often be, the prize would be a decorated cake. That's where the phrase "takes the cake" comes from, and that's where cakewalk initially started. So when you hear the phrase cakewalk, it has some pretty problematic origins as well. As a lot of people, I started to realize there's a lot of history behind the phrases and the colloquialisms that we use on the day to day that we don't think about, and that's why racism is so hard today to say, yeah, that person is racist, and like the society is racist, but there's hidden things. There's things that have been added on and interwoven into our everyday life. So I think it's important to kind of keep that in mind when we talk about race. It's a very sensitive subject too.
Yeah. So I guess kind of bringing all that in. So we're at this point where these where we're with these two African American gentlemen who are performing and creating within their space. So
Yeah.
what is since this was such a long time ago, what is the general feeling from the African American community, the community of creators and people doing the shows?
Well, there's actually an interesting discussion that actually happened between Will Marion Cook and Bob Cole at the time, who was another African American composer. They had a disagreement on how to further the African American community. One thought it was important to have an all-black production team, all-black writers, composers, librettists, and performers. In addition to that, whereas the other one thought that it was more important to be integrated into more of a European or American shows.
Okay.
So it was more like one thought the voice was more important. People of color's voice were important. The other thought it was more important to get the face out there. So it's voice versus face.
So you mean that they're saying it's like their ideological difference was
Yeah.
that one thought there should be more creation for the American, for the African American or
Correct.
person of color voice, and the other one was like, well, maybe we can form into the space that is already put out there for us.
Yeah, and I think that that conversation still occurs till today with other races as well, in addition to the African American
Okay.
community, because there's always the struggle of keeping or creating your own culture, which many African Americans back then they had to do because they were stolen. They essentially were taken from their country, and they were brought here. And their ties to their country, the generations that passed through slavery, they created their own culture there. And people don't realize the importance of culture and having something to be held onto or tied back to. And this is their history. This is their history. Whereas, Scottish people have a lot of folklore, have mythologies. Greek people have the same thing. Italians have the same thing. Japanese have the same thing. It's African Americans that they created their own cultures.
Yeah, so their identity doesn't trace back necessarily to the continent of Africa.
Exactly.
Their heritage comes out of a product of being brought into the United States.
Yeah.
Okay, that's really interesting. It's a really interesting concept to see. So what examples do we see of that in musical theater, bringing it back? So where does the heritage tie into musical theater?
Well, there was Showboat was kind of the first musical to expand what it meant to be a musical because before musicals were seen as a comedic art form,
Okay.
whereas Showboat really tackled the idea of segregation. It was one of the first shows that was integrated. It had black performers as well as white performers performing on stage together, and that was kind of unheard of at the time. And it came out in, let me see, hold on, 1927. Was first performed by the infamous Ziegfeld, and it performed on Broadway. And it was a radical idea. It was based off a 1926 book about a casino boat or a showboat that would have, the dock workers would be of color and the performers would be white.
Yeah. From what I remember from the story, I saw it a couple of years back. It seems like there are spots and intersections where the white characters and the African American characters kind of coexist, but they're both still in their own separate worlds.
Yeah.
Like the main story with the white characters takes place over here, as opposed to the supporting characters who are there to support the Caucasian cast.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was a good step in the right direction, you would say.
Yeah, yeah.
Especially for the time.
I think this was important to say because not a lot of people. Theater was a good way to hold up that mirror. Art is an excellent way to hold up a mirror to society, and this show showed the ridiculousness of the segregation and like the blood, the amount of blood that a person has that makes them African American, and yeah, there's that like storyline about
they do make light of how that your race shouldn't be how you're judged or how you're perceived. There's one character from the beginning, this female who is perceived to have a little bit of African American in her blood, and then her career is destroyed because of this myth, whether it's true or not, about her.
Yeah.
And it's absolutely horrible, and it's something that nobody should be judged upon. And I think it was good of that story to point out that factor, just saying this isn't right.
Yeah, absolutely. Another show I forgot to mention with an all-black cast was Shuffle Along. That came along in 1921. It was the first full-fledged Broadway musical. Had an all-black cast, all-black playwright, composer, lyricist, and it went for 484 nights. Woo!
484 nights, nice.
That's crazy, yeah. It's a really long-running one. Yeah, we can move on.
Yeah, so, I mean, where... I guess coming up there was like you also have vehicles that are written for people of color and African Americans,
Yeah.
but are composed by white writers and or adapted by white writers, white composers. So I see one that just came up, Porgy and Bess.
Yeah. I
So
was just gonna say
George
about
and
that.
Ira Gershwin, both white Jewish fellows in New York,
Yeah.
they came up with this beautiful kind of vehicle for African Americans called Porgy and Bess, where it tells a story of just a group of these people suffering together and just trying to make a struggle through life and the adversities and things that come out. And it's kind of, it almost seems like it's more in the operatic form, but it is written in that musical theater era
Yeah.
and by two very extraordinary musical theater actors. So it's interesting that we have these vehicles now for African Americans or for diverse people or for other diverse races, but they are composed by
White people.
white people.
And we got to be careful with. I mean, as amazing as Porgy and Bess is, there is gonna be problematic things when someone from another culture writes for that culture. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like, there's gonna be
even if they're
interpretations of that culture.
yeah, even if they're adapting from source material that might have been written by a person of color,
Yeah.
there will always be problematic instances for it.
Right. And I mean, there were a lot of people had hang-ups about drug abuse and poverty and like prostitution and that kind of stuff, and portraying the black community as drug abusers and all that other stuff. But I don't think that should be the message of
Yeah,
it's opportunities, right?
yeah.
It's
So I guess the really interesting thing is now is that do we shuffle these stories and these performances away that are now because Porgy and Bess was recently brought back to Broadway with Audra McDonald and Norm Lewis.
yeah, that's right.
And they both did a phenomenal job, and the theater, I believe Audra McDonald won a Tony for it. Somebody will have to fact check me.
Please fact check us.
Fact check
Please. If
us.
we say anything that absolutely, I'm not
Yeah.
opposed to being corrected at all.
Now we are seeing that. The same thing with shows like The King and I for the Asian community, where it is a story with that features a cast of people of color, but it's composed and written by white people. So is this problematic? Is this okay? How do we continue the thing? It's like, do we bring in consultants who know the culture well, who do it justice in the best way you can? Is that okay?
Well, yeah, I think it's always about the respect that you bring to the material. It's not so much like you're walking in there to say, spill the tea about this culture. Like Lin-Manuel Miranda wrote Hawaiian music for Moana, correct?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like Polynesian music
Yeah.
for Moana.
Yeah, and he went to a Polynesian lyricist to kind of get the lyrics. So,
Yeah.
So he's not pulling it out of nowhere. He's collaborating with the culture to produce work for them, even though he is of
Yeah, he's Latino.
Latino.
Yeah. Yeah, Puerto Rican, I believe.
Puerto Rican. Yeah.
Yeah, PR. And I think it was how he approached it, and you could feel the respect that he had throughout the movie.
Yeah.
Disney's a whole different other story as far as like racial tension. Dumbo and Song of the South, those kinds of stuff, and Lady and the Tramp with the Siamese cats. Watching you, Disney, watching you. All right, and in 1950, back to appreciation. 1950, Juanita Hall is the first black performer to win a Tony Award.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. She won it for Bloody Mary in South Pacific.
Okay. Oh. All right.
Yeah, it was 1949. Yeah, she had like 12 other Broadway credits, so it took 12 shows for her to finally get a Tony Award. She would also go on to perform in like a Flower Drum Song, and she both starred in the stage and the movie. That's interesting because Flower Drum Song's an Asian show.
Yeah. Interesting. I did not know that.
I know. That's another show, Flower Drum Song. That one is written by Rodgers and Hammerstein as well.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to the white voice for the people of color.
Yeah.
How do you feel about
Well,
that?
For me, Rodgers and Hammerstein was building off the tradition that was set before them by Gilbert
Gilbert and Sullivan.
Gilbert and Sullivan,
Yeah.
where you had these writer and lyricist in England writing about different cultures. So one of their big shows is the Mikado,
Yeah.
and
Oh boy.
there's so much. There's
That's loaded.
yeah, going into the world of opera, there's a lot of shows written about different cultures, but since they're all written in about Europeans by Europeans in the 1800s, 1900s, 1700s, there was only Europeans to portray the parts, so you have these very problematic roles and casting practices in opera that still prevail to this day, but there is a lot of colorblind casting that you'll see. You'll see more people of Asian descent walking into roles where it's not so much that we're casting based off what this part should be.
Yeah.
We're casting basically off of what voice best fits the role. So unfortunately, that goes both ways. You'll have white women portray Madame Butterfly. You'll have white women portray Aida. You'll have
No.
Well, this is the world of opera. It's a very different discussion, and I think that's something that doesn't translate over to Broadway very well. You can't have there's going to be limits to what you can do. There's a recent article released that the creators of Hairspray do not want high schools to do the show if they cannot cast the roles according to race.
Absolutely. That should
Yeah.
be. Well, there's also the same hand. Like Hawaii doesn't. We don't. We're pretty colorblind when it comes to casting. Like I've portrayed a ton of like white roles,
Yeah.
even though I'm like Asian. I haven't tried. I'm not even gonna try and touch an African American role. I am not. And but shows like Showboat should have people of color in it.
Yeah.
People shows like Hairspray, where the message of the show is integration and acceptance and equality and people treating each other as human beings. This is that's the message of the show. It's not whites versus whites. It's like West Side Story of two white gangs. That doesn't. No.
Yeah.
Like, why would you do that? Or like one painted, darker, white gang.
Well, I think there's been a lot of problematic casting in the past. I mean, what the Natalie Wood. Yeah, I was gonna say the one who portrayed in West Side Story was Natalie Wood, and yeah, they gave her a darker shade of makeup, and she had somebody dub over for her, and she learned the accent, and she did a great job in the role. But then again, it's at the end of the day, it was a white woman portraying a Puerto Rican girl.
Yeah.
And there's stuff, but let's look at today. I think the beautiful part about today is that there are a lot of casting directors and casting agencies who are looking to cast outside of race.
Yeah.
Which is important.
Yeah, I mean, like The Little Mermaid.
Little Mermaid.
Yeah, that's a great example of it. The actress who ended up playing, I forget her name. I will look her up, but that's an important because it's not stage.
Yeah,
it's a movie.
Well, even for Disney's
yeah.
big shows that are coming up, so I mean, Little Mermaid is one, but
Frozen?
you can look at Frozen.
Yeah.
Frozen. They've done a really good job of casting outside of race. It's not all Norwegians or Caucasian type people in their thing. They've had Svens who are African American or people of color. They've had Annas who are people of color, and that's the beauty of it. You can show these little boys and girls who are coming to see the theater that they can inherit or they can take on these leading roles too. They're not forced to be a side character, best friend, or in the ensemble. There's options for them, which is beautiful.
Yeah. That's what's great about today's theater is that there's so many opportunities for people of color when they're coming out for shows. Like Hamilton is a great example of opportunities for people of color. It's white characters portrayed by black and color people.
Yeah, people of color.
People of color. Sorry.
Yeah,
my bad.
Yeah, it's and that's
Yellow.
the nice thing is that
I mean,
the nice thing is that Lin-Manuel Miranda structured his show with this in mind.
Yeah.
His big thing was that all these men at the start of the Americas were all immigrants. So
Yeah.
why shouldn't immigrants or people of color portray those historical figures today? And I think that was a very beautiful message that he can say. It's like, it doesn't have to be. This is a show for us. It's like, if these shows don't exist for us, we have to make them.
Yeah.
And I think that it's a beautiful message that he's sending out there to anybody who's in the creative arts or who's thinking about writing or something. It's like, if you can't find the roles, you got to make them.
You got to make your own ticket, man.
I mean, that's what we're looking at, and then we have a lot of, I guess what we say is problematic casting or problematic shows with. There's these shows that are made for people of color in diverse groups that were composed by white men. Yeah, and it's just like, we have to break out of that. We have to nurture the creativity for those, for the groups to create their own stories and to make their own material, which is, I think it's a good move of Broadway to keep on moving forward and keep on promoting those new materials.
Absolutely. I think it's very important that we support and encourage voices from all communities and all cultures and make sure that they're heard at least. And I kind of want to turn this more to a celebration. I want this to be a celebration. And I think in celebrating all the shows that have come before us, kicking off again, we got Pearl Bailey's All Black Hello Dolly in 1967.
And there's no reason why that can't still happen.
It can happen.
Yeah.
And it's great. Yeah, and it received a special 1968 Tony Award for Pearl Bailey's performance. Yeah, or Pearl Bailey, yeah. And I want to talk about hair. Hair is another one.
Okay.
That's kind of important for, especially for what's going on today with the protests and how that kind of matches
where we
with,
have this counterculture movement, right?
Exactly.
Or this, I guess I wouldn't say counterculture, more like a grassroots culture movement, where we're saying, where we have young people coming together to stand up to a system that oppresses them or oppresses people in their situation. That's why you have the movements like Black Lives Matter, because it's standing up to a system that is oppressing people of color.
Yeah.
And that's why I think this is the first time I'm celebrating Juneteenth.
Same.
Yeah. And growing up in Colorado, I didn't know anything about it. And I don't know if you heard anything about it in Hawaii. It's like this year's the first time I've ever heard about it. And it's so great that it's come at this time. It's a real way to celebrate the advancements of people of color.
This is a perfect day to do that too. And there's so many things that the African American community has overcome throughout the years. They're so tenacious. There's roadblocks that they've between like redlining and Jim Crow and slavery and segregation. You know,
there's been a lot of forward and very good progress, and I still think there's still more to go.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what we're seeing in these protests and these movements is that there is still steps that need to be taken for true equity in our system.
Yeah, and I think the NAACP is a very important organization to have for people of color, and we would hope that
the donation's going to happen. I didn't put it up, but
oh, okay. Yeah. Well, if you want to donate, you can go to our page. There's a donate button on there on my post.
Okay.
Yeah. So it's the NAACP Legal Defense Fund and Education.
Yeah. And so I guess we're approaching a time and we're coming up to this. So why don't you list off some other achievements that you feel are important? Yeah.
Okay. So James Earl Jones is amazing.
Mm-hmm.
He is another performer that I really appreciate. I want to kind of sing the praises of him. He's more so, he's the voice of Mufasa, Darth Vader, and he was a Broadway performer. He did an amazing job in Fences.
Mm-hmm.
I just wanted to celebrate James Earl Jones. He's just kind of my bread and butter. And is there any African American
Well,
performers that have inspired you?
Well, we stated earlier, Audra McDonald,
Mm-hmm.
who is a well-known voice on Broadway, and who's inherited or who's taken on many roles. And I think you were saying that she's the most.
Yeah, she holds the record for the most Tonys.
Yeah, she holds the record for the most Tony wins.
I think she
There's-
got that in 2014. 2014,
Yeah.
I think. Yeah.
Wonderful African American singers, Norm Lewis, who is remind me of the person who originated Cole House Walker Jr.
Oh, Brian Stokes Mitchell.
Brian Stokes Mitchell.
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh, his voice.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, Brian Stokes Mitchell is my jam and jelly and peanut butter. It's so good. He's so good in Let Them Hear You from Ragtime.
Yeah.
Oh my
And
gosh.
honestly, it's like when you look at a story like Ragtime, and this is happening pretty much 100 years ago, where you have these
It is.
the story of these three people or three groups of people coming together and interacting each other over the ages, and the struggle of the African American community in that show is just horrific. The treatment that they face is just awful. That this man cannot get justice for something that he faced injustice in. And at the end, when his rallying call to all his friends is like, you don't surrender, don't back down. If there's injustice in this world, use your voice and let them hear you. Let them go through. And it's
use everything you have available to you.
Yeah.
Use your pencil to write your story. Use your voice to sing songs of your culture. Create. Yeah. Go to a piano like Cole House.
it's such a good message, and it's sad that it still is relevant today,
Yeah.
where it should have been a thing of history, but it's still relevant today. Yeah. And then you also have other great shows that are to promote casts of color. You have shows like Wicked. I mean, not Wicked. Shows like
Well, I mean, there have been
Wicked. Yeah, Wicked. You can have. That's another one where it's another show that hasn't been afraid to cast people of color in leading roles. Which
Well,
is
and it takes place
amazing.
in a fictional land,
Yeah,
so you can. There's no reason why you have to have an all-white cast.
Yeah, sorry. The show I was thinking about was The Wiz. You know, it's was put on and kind of created to help that. And it's like, I know producers like Quincy Jones had a voice on it and helped write some music. And when it came to the movie adaptation, and he's done, and people who've done so much for the community. There's also been.
They won Tonys for that, right?
Yeah, there's also been jukebox musicals like Dreamgirls.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, it's not a jukebox musical.
Well, it follows the path of that, where there's performers and there's that "You're Gonna Love Me" song, which is so
oh my god.
heartbreaking. To see the original Tony performance of it, you just want to cry.
Was it Jennifer Holliday?
I'm not sure.
At the Tony Awards, Jennifer Holliday performance, where she is just pouring her heart out to the audience, when she is just belting that last, "Yeah, I gotta love," you know, when she just,
There's been plenty of plays too. There's The Color Purple, and The Color Purple was recently adapted into a musical a couple of years ago.
Yes, that's right, with Cynthia Erivo.
Cynthia Erivo
Yes.
and Jennifer Hudson.
Jennifer Hudson, yep.
Yeah.
Oh man, so much talent.
Yeah.
Actually, I was just going to talk about The Wiz next. You
Go for
read my
it.
mind. So we were going to talk about how it won the Best Director for a musical, and it won Best Costume Design, and it won it for The Wiz. And Jeffrey Holder is his name.
Okay.
But yeah. Have you heard of the musical Bring It to Noise, Bring It to Fun?
I have not.
Okay. So it's this like dance ish show, and it's a lot of tapping in it. It was done by a young choreographer by the name of Sevion Glover, and he brought the story of an African American typical life on stage, from the days of slavery all the way up to like hip hop. And I think that's important to kind of show the evolution of the culture and how music has been an outlet for many people who have been oppressed.
Mm-hmm.
Music has been an outlet. Theater has also been an outlet for people who feel like their voices aren't being heard. Um, Again, and that goes back to the diversity thing. It's important to cast, not just cast, but also to give people who are starting out with script playwriting or composition. I think it's important to have workshops, even in places like Hawaii, having an indigenous person of color have their voice not just at one theater, but have it available at multiple theaters, giving that opportunity to a wider net. You're casting a wider net with all of that, and I think it's an important thing to have, not just the face but the voice as well.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Have you heard of Passing Strange? I just thought of this.
It rings a bell, but I don't know
I
anything
have the
about it.
DVD.
Okay.
I think it was by Spike Lee, and it was written by Stu. I think his
Okay.
name was Stu. I forgot about that show. That's such a good show. I was watching it the other day.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah, and in 2002, Whoopi Goldberg got an EGOT, completed her EGOT, actually. That's for those of you that don't know, an EGOT is an Emmy, a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony.
Yep. So 4 very different platforms: movie, television, stage,
Yeah.
and recorded sound. Yeah.
Yeah, and then she ended up producing Thoroughly Modern Millie. Yeah, and then she did a great job. And like we said, Audra McDonald won her set the record in 2014 with the most Tonys. Yeah, and in 2016 we had 4 winners
Yeah.
who were of color.
And that was the year, it looks like, of Hamilton.
It was, yeah.
And The Color Purple, the musical. Yeah.
Yeah, it was Cynthia Erivo, Leslie Odom Jr., Davy Diggs, and Renee Elise Goldsberry.
Yeah.
I first saw Renee in, like I know her, Renee, like we're old friends. I first saw Renee in Rent, actually.
Okay.
They had the DVD of the last performance of Rent.
Okay.
She was amazing, and then I got to see her in Hamilton. Oh, she was great, and she deserves that win.
Yeah.
Philippa Sue is also really awesome too. She's an amazing singer and performer,
Yeah.
just like butter. Her voice, is like butter. I tell you.
So I think the nice thing is that tonight we've definitely kind of given a broad scope of what the advancements of people of color
Yeah.
in the theater space. So we're definitely agreeing that we're moving in a positive and forward direction. Would
Yeah.
you say so?
I think there's a lot of work that we can do
Yeah.
as a community. I don't know if there's. I think we just need to start writing and getting out there and making sure that we're seen. A lot of brave people are standing up to theaters and letting them know that their voices aren't being heard, and I think that's so brave of them and so important that more people start doing that, so that these voices can be heard. If we I'm not saying that it's bad. I'm not saying the current state of theater is horrible. That's not at all what I'm saying. There's so many opportunities for people of color, from Latinos in Hamilton. We got Asian people in Hamilton. We've got Black people in Hamilton. There's so many like wide range of races in there, and you have a couple of white people in there. We got a whole melting pot, and I'm sure they all love each other, and I'm sure I'm sure they get along for the most part. I hope so. If you are in the Hamilton cast and you want to spill some tea, let me know.
Yeah. But I think the nice part is too, even in the casting realm, like I addressed before, there is more of a push for colorblind casting.
Yeah.
Which gives voices to those people who thought they'll never get that chance to shine, but it's going to be great because they can continue to move forward and continue to know that there's a chance.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to also leave the artist's voice, even if they're white, make sure that the material is respectful to the community that they're commenting on or writing about, but the artist's vision should be respected, and that in that respect as well. I'm also on that fence, so I'm like of two minds about it. In that we need more representation, but like the artist's voice is just as important too. In addition to that,
there should be as equal amount of opportunities for new pieces of art to be brought to mainstream theater, who are that from voices that we don't typically hear from.
Yeah, because I mean, like you said with opera, it's problematic when you start doing like colorblind casting, and you have, I mean, at the same, it could create more problems if you do it that way too, because like you said, you'll have a white Aida, and if you don't see it, if people don't see that that's a problem, there needs to be a line where we draw it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't think blind casting is the way to go. But I think it's important to get the composers' voices out there. People of color behind playwrights, librettists. I think those are all important aspects to creating the voice, and I think theater is a good way to be that vehicle for them.
Okay.
Yeah. So, yeah. Happy Juneteenth, everyone!
Yeah, happy Juneteenth.
Do you guys have any questions? Anyone out there? Anybody watching? Who's watching?
We have 4 people. We've had about 4 people for the entire show, which is great.
Yay! 4 people.
Yeah, thank you everybody who's joined us today. I think we're going to be wrapping it up here. If you do have questions or comments, we can address them in future episodes or future live streams. So please leave your comments or questions, anything you want to address.
Yeah.
Below.
Leave it in here. I'll be on for a couple more minutes.
And then also, we're the 2 for Free podcast. We typically do a release every. We have a certain release schedule. So we do a regular podcast episode. Today's episode was a little bit different, a little bit special because we are celebrating Juneteenth. On Tuesdays, we release a audio podcast on all audio platforms. This next upcoming Tuesday will be this episode.
Yay!
On Wednesday, we release a video episode to our YouTube channel. And then about Fridays, we're going to be live posting or live streaming different discussions, podcasts, interviews, workshops here on our Facebook page. So you're more than welcome to join us on the Fridays where we put all that together. So Garrett, what else could people do if they want to reach out to us?
You can email us at 2forfreepodcast@gmail.com. My mask broke here, so that's why I'm doing this. I'm not trying to be cute, I promise. So you can email us at 2forfreepodcast@gmail.com. Make sure if you have a question and you want it featured on the show, put in the subject question and put in the body your question, and then you might feature on the show, and we'll answer your questions. We haven't had any yet, so that's why we haven't read any. So email us. You can direct message us here on Facebook or on Instagram. We're at 2forFreePodcast.
On pretty much, all the major social media platforms.
Yeah, I don't really use Twitter. I don't know how it works, and we don't have a TikTok, so sorry about it.
We're not in that cool or 20 and under range anymore, so I don't understand TikTok.
I don't get it.
Yeah.
But it's music. Apparently, it's a platform for former theater kids.
Oh, okay. Well, anyway, we're winding down the show, and we'll let everybody go. But thank you for taking 45 minutes out of your Friday night.
Thank you.
To come watch our discussion. And come back other Fridays and feel free to be part of the discussion, posting a live stream. Maybe we'll even have a Discord page up so that way you can actually join us in video. And maybe we'll get that going for future days. But anyway, so I've been Phil.
I've been Garrett.
And this has been
the 2 for Free podcast. Peace!